Hey everyone, welcome back. My name's Nathan, and this is the third installment of our set of tutorials for using tools like Prettier for auto-formatting code at different stages of the development process, right? So in episode one, we talked about how to set up your command line and VS Code to run auto-formatters like Prettier, and then also linters like ESLint. In the second episode, we talked about using Git hooks as a bit of a catch, right? So Git hooks let us run some code based on when a certain Git event is triggered. So in our case, we used commit, so we had a pre-commit hook. And this is useful for if you forget to format your code and you don't have format on save set up. Now, in each one of these tutorials, though, we've made the assumption that you're working with some sort of team, which is a pretty fair assumption if you're doing coding of any sort. I'm particularly writing these tutorials for the class that I'm TAing where they've got group projects, right? So in that case, Git hooks and your local development environment are not necessarily synced between your teammates, right? So that still means even if you're formatting code nicely and somebody else on your team has also agreed to format code the same way and gone through the setup process, that doesn't mean person number 3 and 4 are also set up the same way. So they could still push code to your repository that isn't formatted in your agreed upon way, right? And this is definitely gonna happen, right? You hire a new junior developer, they haven't followed the onboarding practice yet, or nobody helped them, and they just end up pushing something that's ugly, right? That's just gonna happen. So how can we save ourselves from that process? That is where GitHub Actions come in. Now, GitHub Actions are basically sets of steps, we can call them workflows, that are executed on some sort of cloud VM or container that run actions, GitHub Actions, on stuff in your repository, right? There's all sorts of things you can do for this. Like you can check if a particular pull request is passing tests. We can do CI/CD stuff, so we can build on multiple different devices. So we can build on Windows, we can build on Mac, because you can run different VMs for those in GitHub Actions, and we can just deploy these, right? Super, super useful and cool. We're going to do a very scoped down thing, which is very simply formatting our code if something gets through that pipeline, right? So let's take a look at how we can do that by making some ugly code that gets through first. So here we have our friend, the ugly function bad promise with horrible indentation. It's still ugly. We're just going to make it a little uglier before we go. And we're going to check our Git status. Okay, cool. So it's modified. We're going to stage that thing. And then we're going to commit it. Now, remember, I've got those pre-commit hooks from episode 2 set up anyways. So I have to jump past them or else they'll format my code before I get a chance to push it. So we're going to use a -- no verify. That's just going to skip past my hooks. We're going to commit, and then we are going to push. From here, we can take a look at what is going on in GitHub Actions. So if we jump to my example repository, you can take a look at nlaundry/git-linting-example. I will be cleaning up the documentation for this so that it's actually useful. We can take a look at actions. So actions tells us what's going on. I've got 2 actions set up. We're going to skip past one of them because that was just me experimenting. And the other one is formatting. So we can look at some of this process. Now, I'll go through and show you how this is set up soon, but basically what you can see is we run npx prettier, right? We run prettier via npx, right? With the --write. And then we commit those changes. Fairly straightforward. But how do we tell GitHub to do this for us? That is where the .github directory and workflows come in. So let's jump back to code. And then over here, you can see I've got this not so hidden .github directory with a workflows subdirectory. And then in here, each YAML file will behave like a description for a workflow for your GitHub Actions, right? So there's separate actions that will execute on certain things. So let's open up lint and fix. So we give it a name. This one is format. I should probably change the name of this to match the name of this, but that's a later problem. We give it a name, and then we tell it, similar to our Git hooks thing from before, what we want this action to trigger on, right? What event is going to trigger it? I've got it set up for pull requests onto main. And then just for this example, I've got it set up on push. So anything that gets pushed is going to trigger this. If I were in a different environment, I would probably set this up just on pull requests so that like you don't constantly have this running. Cool. Next, you have a list of jobs. We just have the one. It's called format. And then we write out what that does, right? We want to write a series of steps, some permissions, and what we're running this on. So runs on says we're going to run on Ubuntu latest. This means the VM/container, I'm not actually sure, that's running somewhere in Azure, I think, because GitHub and Microsoft. We're going to be using Ubuntu latest. This is just like the most vanilla Linux distro you can call. You could use macOS, you could use Windows, you could use a variety of other Linux distributions. Ubuntu is a pretty safe bet. So we're going to stick with Ubuntu latest. Next up, we're going to be setting some permissions, right? So we want to set the permission for contents to write. So that just means that this action will be allowed to modify the contents of the repository. I won't get into statuses. This is the important one here, right? Because we're going to be formatting code, which means editing it, and then sort of like recommitting it. Now, remember, this is basically like a vanilla Ubuntu VM that we just got access to. It's bare bones. We need to, as we're writing out steps, think of it as like a new installation that we're doing a bunch of stuff to. And so you kind of want to keep the state of that virtual machine or container running in your head. So the first thing we're going to do is list out a number of steps here. Now, you can either just run executable like shell stuff, like npm clean install, or later on we'll just do the formatting command that we've been doing. Or you can make uses of existing workflows. You can kind of like import and call them. It's kind of how this works. So let's just take a quick look out of this file at where you can find some of those existing workflows. So if we jump over, this is just a repository. Actually, let's jump over. action/checkout at v4, right? This is the same format as any sort of regular repository, and that's all that this is. So when we jump over here, this is sort of the GitHub Actions project, and under that, we've got checkout, right? And that's all that this is. You can read all about how this workflow works and how to make use of it. I won't jump into greater detail on how to write one of these today. I'm more interested in sharing like how to make use of them. So nice. This is nice and transparent. We can take a look. Then we can give it some additional stuff. Basically, here we're saying we're going to check out with the branch that we just pushed to, right? Whichever one is currently kind of active. Next up, what we're going to do is make use of the setup node workflow, and we're going to set it up with node version 20. That's just sort of an arbitrary decision. It seems recent enough, right? Cool. So those are the workflows that we're making use of. Our VM is now checked out this branch and then installed node and set it up ready to go. That means at this point, we can make use of NPM. So I'm going to do an npm CI, clean install, and that just means we're installing the project, right? This vanilla create React app thing that I threw together for this example. And then on that code, I'm going to do npx prettier dot, so that's all the files, -- write, right? So the same thing we've been doing from the command line, the same thing we ran in our Git hook, it's the same thing running here in this little virtual machine that we spun up for a handful of seconds. The last thing we're going to do is commit those changes, right? It's great that we formatted it, but we kind of need to make use of that. And the only way to do that is if we add it to our repository in some noteworthy way. So we're going to commit it. This makes use of Stefan Zweifel's git auto commit action v5. I hope I got that name right. And what we're going to do is give it a with. So these are kind of like environment variables you can sort of pass into the workflow, right? We're going to give it a commit message, apply formatting changes. I might give it a tag like chore formatting changes, and we're going to commit those onto the same branch. This is a little messy because I'm making a simple like example. Again, I think it would be much better to run this on pull request specifically so that the commit's like on that other branch, not pushed directly to main, but what can you do? So now that we have this explained, let's again take a look at actions. So earlier, when we pushed this code with that ugly formatting, that triggered, because it was push, right? That triggered our GitHub actions. So we can take a look again at format. So format will mirror that workflow. Actually, let's see if I can open link in a new tab, and we're just going to pop these open side by side so that you can see how they mirror one another. So we've got our linting fix, although that is named format. Over here, that job is named format. We have a setup job, basically it goes and grabs us our VM or container, and it downloads those action repositories. Cool. Then it goes through step by step, just like we thought, right? It's going to run the actions checkout. So we're checking out that branch. You can open this up and see what it's doing, fetching the repository, making sure we're on the correct branch, all of that stuff. It runs the node setup. It runs the clean install. And this is the same stuff that you would get if you ran it in your terminal, right? Because this is just some machine running in the cloud doing this stuff for you. We do the formatting thing. It gives you the same stuff as before. We commit those changes, and then it does some cleanup. And that's really all there is to it. So if you want to set one of these up, all you have to do, right, you can jump back over here. We're going to do an ls-a because we're looking at these dot files, which are hidden normally. We have this .github, just like we saw in our GitHub route, like in the browser. We've got .github. We're going to cd into that. You see we have workflows. And then we have these YAML files. Each one of these YAML files is essentially translated as like a script for how to set up a virtual machine and then execute this workflow of stuff you want to do for your repo. And it's about that simple. There's lots of existing workflows that you can make use of. This is just the simplest example that I could find to sort of complete this tutorial. So thank you very much. That's this. Oh, wait, I almost forgot. I should show you that the code is fixed. So when we look at our history of commits, we've got this last one, applying formatting changes. So you remember the last step in our workflow for linting fix or format is to use Stefan Zweifel's git auto commit. So it's auto committing, apply formatting changes, and we see apply formatting changes. When we take a look, I'm just going to bring this over here. We see it gets rid of that white space for us, or places white space appropriately so that it's nicely formatted. And one last thing, back home. Wow. I'm going to pull that. And if we open it up in Vim, that ugly function is nicely formatted and we're good to go. So that's a little introduction into how to use GitHub actions along with auto formatters like Prettier and then all throughout your development experience. I hope this has been helpful. I also hope this backdrop isn't too ridiculous. Good luck with class and stuff, I guess. Thank you.